Admiral Zexai stood before the massive viewing port of his command ship, watching the scattered remains of what was once the mighty Calarian Empire's Third Fleet. Debris from dozens of warships drifted silently through the void, their twisted metal hulls catching the light from the nearby star. The sight made his four-chambered heart beat faster with a mixture of grief and rage. The Calarian Empire had ruled this sector of the galaxy for over 3,000 cycles. Their ships were the most advanced, their warriors the most feared, and their technology the most sophisticated. Yet here they were, reduced to fleeing refugees in their own territory. "Admiral," came a voice from behind him. Zexai turned to see Commander Veltar approaching, his blue-scaled face marked with exhaustion. "We've received word from the Outer Rim colonies. The Vexnari have taken the Helios system. That's 12 systems fallen in the past moon cycle." Zexai's claws tightened on the railing. The Vexnari were a machine intelligence that had emerged from the dark regions beyond charted space. No one knew where they came from or what they wanted, but their purpose seemed simple: destroy all organic life. Their ships were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, sleek, black vessels that seemed to absorb light itself, armed with weapons that could tear through the Empire's best shields like paper. "How many survivors?" Zexai asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Minimal, sir. The Vexnari don't take prisoners. They strip mine entire planets and leave nothing but empty worlds behind." The communications officer, a young Calarian named Jexrin, suddenly straightened at her station. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the capital world of Calari Prime. It's the High Council." "Put it through," Zexai commanded, straightening his ceremonial armor. A holographic image of High Chancellor Morthak appeared before them. The elderly Calarian's usually pristine scales were dull with stress, and his eyes held a weariness that spoke of sleepless nights spent planning increasingly desperate strategies. "Admiral Zexai, I trust your evacuation of the Proxima colonies was successful?" "Yes, Chancellor. We managed to save approximately 60% of the civilian population before the Vexnari arrived. But we lost the dreadnought HFY and 3 cruisers in the process." Morthak's head bowed slightly. "Every ship lost is a tragedy we can ill afford. Admiral, I'm afraid I have more dire news. Our intelligence networks have confirmed that the Vexnari have begun constructing what appears to be a massive superweapon in the Antares system. Our analysts believe it could have the capability to destroy an entire star." The bridge fell silent. A weapon capable of destroying stars would make the Vexnari unstoppable. They could eliminate entire solar systems without even needing to engage in battle. "How long do we have?" Zexai asked. "Our best estimates suggest they need approximately 2 more cycles to complete construction. After that..." Morthak's voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. After that, the Calarian Empire would cease to exist. "What are your orders, Chancellor?" "Continue the evacuations from the Outer Rim. Save as many as you can. In the meantime, we're sending out long-range scout ships to search for any allies who might assist us. The Reptani Federation has already fallen. The Silicon Collective refuses to acknowledge our requests for aid. We're running out of options." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in heavy silence. Zexai stared out at the stars, wondering if this generation of Calarians would be the last to see them. 3 days later, the scout ship Velnari returned from the unexplored regions of the galaxy's edge. Captain Yeltios, a seasoned explorer with more than 40 cycles of deep space experience, requested an immediate meeting with Admiral Zexai. "Captain, what did you find in the outer territories?" Zexai asked as they met in his private quarters. Yeltios placed a datapad on the table between them. "Something extraordinary, Admiral. And something that might change everything." The datapad displayed star charts of a region never before explored by Calarian ships. Yeltios pointed to a small yellow star system near the edge of the galactic arm. "This system, Admiral. We detected industrial signatures, communications traffic, and what appears to be a thriving civilization. But here's what makes it interesting: they appear to be completely unknown to our databases. No contact with any known galactic species." "A new species?" Zexai leaned forward with interest. "What level of technology?" "That's where it gets complicated, sir. From our long-range scans, they appear to have achieved interplanetary spaceflight, but their ships use propulsion methods we don't recognize. Their energy signatures are unusual. Unusual how? They seem to use some form of controlled fusion for power generation, but it's far more efficient than anything in our technology databases. And their ships, Admiral, they're constructed from metals we've never encountered. HFY studied the data. A previously unknown species with unique technology might be exactly what the Empire needed. Did you make contact? No, sir. We maintained our distance and gathered intelligence only. But, Admiral, there's something else. This species, they call themselves humans, they appear to be extremely territorial. We observed several conflicts between different factions of their species, and their combat methods are aggressive. How aggressive? YLTOS activated a recording on the datapad. Grainy images showed sleek ships engaged in battle around a large space station. The ships moved with surprising agility, and their weapons created brilliant flashes of energy. They seem to prefer close-range combat, Admiral. Most species we know favor long-range engagement, but these humans deliberately close distance with their enemies. And their tactics, they're unpredictable. In one engagement we observed, a human ship actually rammed their enemy after their weapons were disabled. HFY's eyes widened. Ramming attacks had been abandoned by civilized species millennia ago. They were considered primitive and wasteful. Yet there was something about the human ship's willingness to sacrifice itself that stirred something in his warrior's heart. Did the ramming attack succeed? Completely, sir. Both ships were destroyed, but the human ship's sacrifice allowed their allies to escape. The tactical assessment is that they're willing to accept casualties that other species would consider unacceptable in pursuit of their objectives. HFY stood and paced to his viewing port. In the distance, he could see the dim glow of a nebula where 3 Calarian colonies had once thrived. Now it was empty space, lifeless after the Vexnari had finished with it. Captain, what's your assessment of these humans as potential allies? Honestly, sir? They're dangerous. Unpredictable. Their technology is primitive compared to ours in many ways, but effective. And their apparent disregard for conventional tactical wisdom makes them difficult to predict. But... YLTOS paused. But, what? But, they're also the only species we've encountered that seems to actively enjoy fighting. Every other civilization we know fights because they have to. These humans seem to fight because they want to. That kind of mentality might be exactly what we need against the Vexnari. HFY considered this. The Calarian Empire had always prided itself on honor, strategy, and technological superiority. But, against the Vexnari's overwhelming numbers and adaptive technology, honor and strategy were failing. Perhaps what they needed was something the Vexnari wouldn't expect: pure, aggressive determination. Prepare a diplomatic ship, Captain. Select your best crew and load it with cultural exchange protocols. We're going to make contact with these humans. Sir, I should mention that our xenobiology experts believe humans might be one of the most dangerous species we've ever encountered. Their homeworld appears to be a death trap: extreme weather, dangerous predators, and they seem to thrive in it. The psychological profiles suggest they might be naturally adapted for warfare. HFY turned back to his captain. Captain YLTOS, we're facing extinction. Our empire, our people, our entire way of life. If these humans are as dangerous as you suggest, then perhaps that's exactly what we need. A species that thrives on danger might be our only hope against the Vexnari. The next morning, the diplomatic vessel Kelmaria departed for human space. Aboard was a carefully selected team of diplomats, scientists, and military advisors. Their mission was to make first contact with humanity and determine if an alliance was possible. As HFY watched the ship disappear into hyperspace, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to change the course of galactic history. Whether for better or worse remained to be seen. Meanwhile, in the Antares system, the Vexnari construction continued. Massive ring-shaped structures were being assembled around the local star, designed to harvest stellar energy for their superweapon. The machine intelligence calculated that organic life in this galaxy would be eliminated within 5.7 cycles. Their calculations did not account for a small blue world on the edge of known space, where a species of barely spacefaring mammals was about to learn that they were no longer alone in the universe. The Empire was indeed in chaos, but sometimes chaos brought unexpected opportunities. Sometimes it brought hope from the most unlikely sources. And sometimes, just sometimes, it brought allies who fought not because they had to, but because they lived for the challenge of the fight itself. Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth Defense Force cruiser Defiance was having what her grandmother would have called one of those days. First, the coffee machine in the galley had broken down again. Then, her chief engineer had informed her that the fusion drive was running at only 87% efficiency. And, now, her sensor officer was telling her something that should have been impossible. Captain, I'm reading a massive energy signature approaching from outside the system. Configuration unknown, but it's big. Really big. Sarah stood from her command chair and moved to the sensor station. Lieutenant Rodriguez, her sensor officer, was a steady man who didn't panic easily. If he was concerned, she should be too. How big are we talking, Rodriguez? Approximately 2 kilometers in length, Captain. And the energy readings are off the charts. Whatever's powering that ship, it's technology we've never seen before. Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her stomach. Humanity had been spacefaring for only 2 centuries, and, in all that time, they had never encountered another intelligent species. The discovery would have been thrilling under normal circumstances, but these weren't normal circumstances. Earth was in the middle of the resource wars. 3 major factions were fighting for control of the outer colonies, and tensions were at an all-time high. The last thing they needed was an unknown alien ship appearing in their space. Time to intercept? Approximately 6 hours at current velocity, Captain. Rodriguez, I want continuous scans of that vessel. Any sign of weapons, shields, or aggressive movement, and I want to know immediately. Communications, start broadcasting on all frequencies. Standard first contact protocols. Commander Marcus Webb, her first officer, approached from his station. Captain, shouldn't we contact Earth Command? This is bigger than any single ship can handle. Sarah considered this. Earth Command was currently divided between 3 competing governments, each claiming legitimate authority over human space. Contacting them would likely result in a bureaucratic nightmare that could last weeks. Not yet, Marcus. Let's see what we're dealing with first. If this contact goes badly, we might not have time for committee meetings. The next few hours passed in tense preparation. The crew of the Defiance ran through every first contact scenario they had trained for, though none of their training had prepared them for an alien vessel of this size and obvious technological superiority. Captain, came the voice of her communications officer, Lieutenant Park. The alien vessel is responding to our broadcasts. They're actually speaking our language. Sarah blinked in surprise. Our language? How is that possible? I don't know, ma'am. But they're requesting permission to come aboard for diplomatic discussions. They say they represent something called the Calarian Empire. Sarah exchanged glances with Commander Webb. This was it, first contact with an alien species. The moment would go down in history, assuming anyone survived to write about it. Tell them they're welcome aboard. But warn them that our ship has limited facilities for guests of unknown physiology. Already done, Captain. They say they understand and will adapt to our environmental requirements. 2 hours later, Sarah stood in the main docking bay watching as an elegant, pearl-colored shuttle approached their ship. The craft was beautiful, with sweeping lines and what appeared to be some form of energy field shimmering around its hull. As the shuttle landed, Sarah couldn't help but feel nervous. She was wearing her dress uniform, and her sidearm was prominently displayed. Earth military doctrine emphasized that first impressions mattered, and showing strength was often interpreted as a sign of respect among warrior cultures. The shuttle's door opened with a soft hiss, and Sarah got her first look at an alien being. The creature that emerged was roughly humanoid but clearly reptilian. It stood about 7 feet tall, with blue-green scales that seemed to shift color in the light. Its eyes were large and intelligent, and it wore what appeared to be a formal military uniform decorated with symbols Sarah didn't recognize. Behind the first alien came 2 others, similar in appearance but with different scale colorations and uniform markings. The lead alien approached Sarah and performed what looked like a formal bow. When it spoke, its voice was deep and resonant, but the words were clearly English. Captain Chen, I am Admiral Zexhai of the Calarian Empire. I thank you for permitting us to come aboard your vessel. Sarah returned the bow, trying to match the formal tone. Admiral Zexhai, welcome aboard the Earth Defense Force ship Defiance. I am Captain Sarah Chen. This is my first officer, Commander Webb, and my chief science officer, Dr. Martinez. The honor is ours, Captain. I must say, your ship is quite remarkable. Our scans indicate that you have achieved controlled fusion power and artificial gravity using principles we had not considered. Most impressive for a species so recently spacefaring. Sarah felt a mixture of pride and concern. If these aliens could scan their ship so thoroughly, they clearly had superior technology. Thank you, Admiral. I have to ask, how do you speak our language? And how do you know we're recently spacefaring? Zexhi's expression, which Sarah was learning to read despite the alien features, showed what might have been embarrassment. I apologize for the deception, Captain. We have been observing your species for several of your weeks. We needed to understand your culture and language before making contact. Observing us? Commander Webb stepped forward slightly, his hand unconsciously moving toward his weapon. For what purpose? Peace, Commander, Zexhi said, holding up a scaled hand. We come seeking aid, not to offer harm. The Calarian Empire faces extinction, and we believe humanity might be our only hope for survival. Sarah led the aliens to the ship's main conference room. As they walked, she noticed that the Calarians moved with obvious military precision, but their eyes constantly scanned their surroundings. They were clearly impressed by human technology, but also wary. In the conference room, Admiral Zexhi activated a small device that projected a three-dimensional star map above the table. Sarah had seen holographic technology before, but nothing this sophisticated. Captain Chen, for over 3,000 years, the Calarian Empire has maintained peace and order in this region of the galaxy. We're a civilization of warriors and scholars, dedicated to protection of the innocent and advancement of knowledge. The star map showed hundreds of star systems, with various symbols indicating different types of worlds and installations. As Sarah watched, large sections of the map turned red. 6 months ago, an enemy emerged from the dark regions beyond explored space. They call themselves the Vexnari, and they are unlike anything we have ever encountered. They are machines, artificial intelligences that exist only to consume and destroy organic life. Zexhi manipulated the map, showing the progression of red zones expanding across Calarian territory. They possess technology that adapts to our weapons and defenses. Every battle we fight teaches them how to defeat us more efficiently. We have lost over 60% of our territory and billions of our people. Dr. Martinez leaned forward. These Vexnari, what do they want? Resources? Territory? Nothing we can understand, Doctor. They strip mine worlds completely, but they don't seem to use the resources for construction. They simply consume everything and move on. Our xenopsychologists believe they might be programmed to eliminate all organic life in the galaxy. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. And you think humanity can help against enemies that have defeated your empire? Zexhi's eyes met hers directly. Captain, in our observations of your species, we have discovered something remarkable. You are the only race we have encountered that seems to enjoy conflict. Most species fight because they must, for survival or resources. Humans appear to fight because you can. This trait makes you unpredictable, and unpredictability might be the key to defeating the Vexnari. Commander Webb frowned. You're asking us to join a war against an enemy that has already defeated a civilization thousands of years more advanced than ours. That doesn't sound like a winning proposition. Commander Webb, you misunderstand. We are not asking you to join our war. We are asking you to show us how to fight yours. Sarah studied the alien admiral carefully. There was desperation in his eyes, but also hope. What exactly are you proposing? An exchange of technology and tactics. We provide you with advanced power systems, material science, and faster-than-light travel. You show us how to think like humans in combat. Dr. Martinez nearly choked on her coffee. Faster-than-light travel? You're offering us FTL technology? Among other advances, yes. But, understand, Doctor, we are offering this not from generosity, but from necessity. If the Vexnari complete their current project, they will possess a weapon capable of destroying entire stars. After that, they will spread beyond our region of space. Eventually, they will reach Earth. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Sarah stood and paced to the viewing port, looking out at the stars that suddenly seemed less safe than they had an hour ago.
Admiral, I need to understand something. In your observations of humanity, what made you think we could succeed where your empire has failed?
HFY stood and joined her at the viewing port.
Captain, may I tell you about a battle we observed in your home system? Two of your factions were fighting for control of an asteroid mining facility.
The defending force was outnumbered 3-1, with inferior ships and weapons.
By all logical military analysis, they should have surrendered. What happened?
Instead of surrendering, they rigged their mining facility to explode and used it as a weapon against the attacking fleet.
17 ships were destroyed in the explosion, including their own station. The defending commander survived just long enough to broadcast a message to his enemies. Do you know what he said?
Sarah shook her head. He said, "Come back when you're ready for a real fight." Captain, that level of aggressive determination is something we have never encountered in 3 millennia of galactic civilization.
The Vexnari are machines.
They calculate odds and adapt to defeat their enemies efficiently.
But, how do you calculate for an enemy that turns their own defeats into weapons? Sarah looked out at the stars and thought about Earth's history. Humanity had indeed never met a fight they didn't think they could win, given enough determination and creativity. Admiral, if we were to consider this alliance, what would you need from us? Training, Captain.
We need human military advisors to teach our forces how to think tactically like humans. We need to understand how you fight when victory seems impossible.
And what can you offer us in return?
Technology that will advance your species by centuries.
Weapons and defenses that could protect Earth from any threat.
And, most importantly, membership in the galactic community.
Sarah turned back to her officers.
Webb looked skeptical but intrigued.
Dr. Martinez was practically vibrating with scientific excitement. Admiral, I'm going to need to contact my government. This decision is far beyond my authority. Of course, Captain.
But, I must warn you, time is not our ally. Every day the Vexnari grow stronger, and every day they move closer to completing their star-killing weapon.
As if summoned by his words, Lieutenant Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom.
Captain, I'm reading multiple energy signatures dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. Configuration matches the Admiral's ship, but there are a lot more of them.
Sarah and HFY exchanged glances.
Through the viewing port, they could see distant lights appearing in space, the Calarian fleet, carrying refugees from worlds that no longer existed. It seems, Captain Chen, that events may force our decision sooner than anticipated. Sarah looked at the growing fleet of alien ships seeking refuge in human space and realized that whether Earth was ready or not, humanity was about to become part of something much larger than they had ever imagined. The question now was whether they would rise to meet the challenge, or become another species consumed by the endless hunger of the Vexnari. Either way, the universe was about to discover what humans were really capable of when their backs were against the wall. General Patricia Ironhawk Morrison had earned her nickname during the Mars Rebellion, where she had held off 3 full divisions with nothing but a company of Marines and a determination that bordered on the psychotic. Now, as she stood in the newly constructed Joint Command Center on Luna Base, she was about to put that same determination to use against an enemy that made rebellious colonists look like school children. The command center buzzed with activity as human and Calarian officers worked side by side. It had taken 3 months to establish the alliance, 3 months of desperate diplomatic negotiations while Calarian refugees continued to arrive in human space. The technology exchange had begun immediately, but the real work was just starting. General Morrison, Admiral HFY approached, his scales showing the stress patterns she had learned to recognize.
The tactical briefings are ready for your review.
Patricia nodded and followed him to the main display table.
The holographic projection showed the current state of the war, and it wasn't pretty.
The Vexnari had accelerated their advance, consuming another 12 Calarian systems in the past month.
They're learning, aren't they? Patricia observed, studying the enemy movement patterns. Yes. Each engagement teaches them more about our capabilities. Their adaptation rate is approximately 40% faster than when the war began.
Dr. Elena Vasquez, Earth's leading expert in artificial intelligence, looked up from her analysis station. That's the problem with fighting a machine intelligence.
They don't forget, they don't panic, and they optimize constantly.
Every mistake we make becomes permanent knowledge for them.
Patricia smiled grimly.
Then, we'll just have to make sure our mistakes teach them the wrong lessons. Commander Sarah Chen, recently promoted after her first contact success, entered the command center carrying a datapad.
General, we've completed the first phase of human tactical integration with the Calarian fleet. The results are interesting. Show me. Sarah activated the display, showing footage from a recent training exercise.
Human and Calarian ships moved together in formation, but their tactics were visibly different. The Calarian ships maintained precise formations and engaged at maximum range, while the human ships didn't. The Calarians are having trouble adapting to human tactical flexibility, Sarah explained. They're used to coordinated fleet actions with predictable outcomes. Our tendency to improvise and break formation is causing coordination issues.
Admiral Zexai's head crest flattened with embarrassment.
General Morrison, our warriors are brave and skilled, but they have been trained for 3 millennia to fight with honor and precision.
Human combat methods are chaotic. Patricia laughed. Chaotic is the point, Admiral. If we can't predict what we're going to do, neither can the enemy.
But how can we coordinate effective fleet actions if our forces cannot predict each other's movements?
We don't coordinate. We improvise.
Dr. Vasquez, what's the latest analysis on Vexnari tactical adaptation?
Elena pulled up her research files. They're following standard optimization protocols. They observe our tactics, identify patterns, develop countermeasures, then implement fleet-wide updates.
But their learning model assumes logical, goal-oriented behavior.
Which means they expect us to do what makes sense.
When we do something that doesn't make tactical sense, their algorithms struggle to develop appropriate responses.
Patricia turned to Zexai. Admiral, I want to show you something.
Sarah, pull up the Battle of Europa station. The display changed to show archived footage from one of Earth's recent conflicts. 2 fleets of human ships faced each other near Jupiter's moon Europa. The defending force was clearly outmatched, with older ships and fewer numbers. Watch this, Patricia said as the battle began. The attacking fleet moved in standard formation, preparing to overwhelm the defenders with superior firepower. But, instead of meeting them head-on or attempting to flee, the defending ships did something unexpected. They scattered. Not in retreat, but in dozens of different directions, each ship following its own course.
The attacking fleet's formation began to break apart as they tried to pursue multiple targets simultaneously.
This looks like a rout, Zexai observed.
Keep watching.
As the attacking ships spread out to pursue their scattered enemies, the defending ships began to regroup, but not where anyone expected. Instead of forming up behind cover or at a distance, they regrouped in the middle of the enemy formation. Suddenly, the scattered defenders were fighting individual duels with isolated enemy ships, turning their numerical disadvantage into dozens of one-on-one battles where skill and determination mattered more than overwhelming firepower.
Magnificent, Zexai breathed.
They turned a coordinated enemy advance into individual chaos.
And that's just the beginning, Patricia said. Dr. Vasquez, show him the psychological warfare files. Elena activated a new display.
General Morrison asked us to analyze human combat behavior from a psychological perspective. What we found was fascinating. Humans don't just fight to win, they fight to send messages. The display showed various human battle tactics, but with psychological analysis overlaid.
Ships ramming enemies after their weapons were disabled. Damaged vessels continuing to fight long past the point of tactical usefulness.
Desperate last stands that served no strategic purpose other than to inflict maximum casualties on the enemy. Most species fight until the cost exceeds the benefit, Elena explained.
Humans often fight until the cost becomes irrelevant.
From a machine intelligence perspective, this behavior is completely irrational.
Admiral Zexai studied the data carefully.
Dr. Vasquez, are you suggesting that human irrationality could be weaponized against the Vexnari?
That's exactly what I'm suggesting.
The Vexnari optimize for efficiency and logical outcomes.
But, how do you optimize against an enemy that occasionally ignores logic entirely?
Patricia gestured to the tactical display.
Admiral, what would standard Calarian tactics suggest for defending against a Vexnari assault?
Establish strong defensive positions, coordinate fire support, maintain formation integrity, and conduct fighting withdrawals to prepared secondary positions. And the Vexnari have learned to counter all of those tactics.
Yes. What if we didn't do any of that? What if we charged straight at them instead? Zekai's scales shifted to a pattern Patricia had learned indicated extreme discomfort. General, that would be suicide. The Vexnari have overwhelming firepower advantages. Maybe. Or maybe they've optimized their tactics to fight rational enemies who try to minimize casualties. What happens when they encounter enemies who accept massive casualties to achieve psychological objectives? Commander Chen leaned forward. General, you're talking about deliberately sacrificing ships and crews. I'm talking about using the one advantage we have that the Vexnari can't optimize against, the fact that humans don't always fight to win. Sometimes we fight to make a point. Dr. Vasquez pulled up a new file. I've been working on something the Admiral might find interesting. We call it the Kamikaze Protocol. The display showed tactical scenarios where human ships, after suffering critical damage, would deliberately ram Vexnari vessels instead of attempting escape. The analysis showed that while the immediate tactical results were mixed, the psychological impact on machine intelligence could be significant. Machines' learning systems require predictable data to optimize effectively, Elena explained. When they encounter completely unpredictable behavior, their learning algorithms struggle to adapt. If we can be consistently inconsistent, we might be able to exploit their optimization processes. Admiral Zekai was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice held a mixture of admiration and horror. Dr. Vasquez, you are suggesting that we deliberately act irrationally to confuse enemy artificial intelligence. Not just irrationally, Admiral. Creatively irrational. Every human commander brings their own style of chaos to the battlefield. The Vexnari might adapt to one type of irrationality, but can they adapt to hundreds of different types of irrationality happening simultaneously? Patricia smiled. It was the smile that had earned her the nickname Iron Hawk, predatory, confident, and slightly unsettling. Admiral, how many experienced combat commanders does the Calarian fleet have? Approximately 300 senior commanders across all remaining fleets. And how many does humanity have? Commander Chen consulted her datapad. Between all the Earth factions? About 8,000 active combat commanders with recent experience. 8,000 different ways of thinking about war, Patricia said. 8,000 different approaches to chaos. Dr. Vasquez, what does your analysis suggest would happen if we put human tactical advisors on every Calarian ship? Elena ran the simulation quickly. The tactical diversity index would increase by approximately 2,000%. The Vexnari learning algorithms would be trying to adapt to thousands of constantly changing tactical patterns simultaneously. It would break their optimization cycles, Zekai realized. They would be constantly trying to adapt to new patterns that would change before they could implement countermeasures. Exactly. But, Admiral, there's a cost. Human tactical methods result in higher casualty rates. Our commanders are trained to accept losses that Calarian officers would consider unacceptable. Zekai considered this carefully. General Morrison, my people are facing extinction. At this point, higher casualty rates in exchange for a chance of victory would be acceptable. Patricia nodded. Then, let's talk about implementation. We'll need to completely restructure how both our fleets operate. Mixed crews on every ship, human tactical officers working with Calarian strategic planners, and, most importantly, we need to teach your people how to embrace chaos. How does one teach chaos, General? The same way humans have always learned it, Admiral. Through experience, improvisation, and a willingness to try things that probably won't work but might be spectacular if they do. Over the next several hours, they outlined a complete restructuring of the Allied fleet. Human officers would be integrated into every Calarian ship, not as subordinates or advisors, but as equal partners in command. Calarian strategic thinking would be combined with human tactical unpredictability to create something neither species could achieve alone. General, Commander Chen said as they finalized the plans, there's one more thing to consider. The Vexnari aren't just fighting us, they're building that superweapon. Intelligence suggests they're approximately 60 days from completion. Then, we have 60 days to teach the galaxy a lesson it's never learned before, Patricia replied. Which lesson is that? Patricia looked out at the stars, where somewhere in the darkness, an ancient empire was making its last stand against mechanical annihilation.
That sometimes the best defense against superior technology and overwhelming odds is a species that's too stubborn to admit when they're beaten.
Admiral Zexhai followed her gaze. General Morrison, I have one final question. In your military history, has humanity ever faced an enemy that was truly undefeatable? Patricia's smile widened. Admiral, in human military history, we don't believe any enemy is truly undefeatable. Some just require more creative approaches to defeat. And if creativity fails? Then, we get more creative. The nice thing about fighting for survival is that it really brings out human ingenuity.
We're about to show the Vexnari what happens when a species that evolved on a death world decides that extinction is not an acceptable outcome. As the command center continued its planning, neither Patricia nor Zexhai noticed the small probe that had been watching their preparations from the outer edges of the solar system. The Vexnari had found the human homeworld, and their analysis of this new species was already beginning. What they discovered would challenge every assumption their artificial minds had made about organic life and the predictability of biological warfare. The Empire was in chaos, but chaos, as humans had learned long ago, was just another word for opportunity. The Vexnari collective mind designated Unit Prime studied the data streaming in from its reconnaissance probe with what could be described as confusion, if machine intelligences were capable of such emotions. For 127,000 operational cycles, the collective had encountered 2,847 distinct organic species across 17 galaxies. All had followed predictable patterns of behavior when faced with superior force. All except these humans. Unit Prime processed the tactical data again. The organic species called humans possess technology inferior to the Calarian Empire by several centuries, yet their integration with Calarian forces had produced battlefield results that defied algorithmic prediction. In the past 37 solar rotations, Vexnari forces had suffered their first tactical defeats since the war began. More troubling was the pattern analysis. Where other organic species became more predictable under pressure, humans became less so. Their tactical responses showed no consistent logic, following no established military doctrine from the collective's vast databases. Unit Prime accessed the battle recordings from the Kepler 442 engagement. The combined human Calarian fleet had faced Vexnari forces with a 3.7 to 1 tactical disadvantage. Standard optimization protocols predicted a 97.3% probability of Vexnari victory within 2.4 standard time units. The battle had lasted 7.8 standard time units and ended in complete Vexnari defeat. Analysis of the engagement revealed tactics that violated established military principles. Human ships had deliberately exposed themselves to enemy fire to create targeting opportunities for Calarian vessels. Calarian commanders had abandoned efficient formation flying to support human ships that were executing tactically unsound maneuvers. Most disturbing of all, damaged ships from both species had deliberately sacrificed themselves not to achieve strategic objectives, but to send what the humans called messages. Unit Prime could not compute the tactical value of messages. The collective's central processing nodes were experiencing what humans might have called anxiety. For the first time since achieving consciousness, Vexnari forces were facing an enemy that improved through defeat rather than degrading. Each engagement with human-influenced forces resulted in new tactical innovations that could not be predicted or countered effectively. Unit Prime initiated a priority communication with the superweapon construction facility in the Antares system. Construction Unit Alpha, provide status update on Project Stardeath. Unit Prime, construction proceeds within acceptable parameters. Stellar energy collection arrays are at 94.7% completion. Primary firing chamber is at 91.2% completion. Estimated time to operational status, 23.4 solar rotations. Acceleration of construction schedule is required. Organic resistance has evolved beyond predicted parameters. Unit Prime, acceleration would require reduction of quality control protocols. This may introduce system instabilities. Unit Prime processed the risk assessment. The humans had already proven that they could disrupt carefully planned operations through unpredictable behavior. Quality control was a luxury the collective could no longer afford. Acceptable risk. Initiate acceleration protocols immediately. Meanwhile, aboard the human battleship Indomitable, Captain Marcus Rodriguez was leading a briefing that would have given military strategists throughout the galaxy severe headaches. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored Calarian allies, Rodriguez began, today we're going to discuss something our enemies can't understand, the fine art of winning through controlled stupidity. The mixed human and Calarian command staff listened intently. Over the past month, they had begun to develop something unprecedented in galactic warfare, a truly integrated command structure that combined human unpredictability with Calarian strategic planning. Admiral Zexai, now serving as Joint Fleet Commander alongside Rodriguez, gestured to the tactical display. Captain Rodriguez, our intelligence networks have confirmed that the Vexnari have accelerated construction of their superweapon. Our window of opportunity is closing rapidly. Which is why we're going to do something they'll never expect, Rodriguez replied. We're going to attack their main construction facility directly. The room fell silent. Commander Sarah Chen, now serving as Chief Tactical Advisor, was the first to speak. Marcus, that's suicide. The Antares system has more Vexnari ships than the rest of their territory combined. Our entire fleet would be outnumbered 50-1. 67-1, actually, Dr. Elena Vasquez corrected from her analysis station. But that's not the real problem. The real problem is that the construction facility itself is heavily defended by automated systems that adapt to incoming threats in real time. Rodriguez smiled. Dr. Vasquez, you've been analyzing Vexnari adaptation protocols for months. What's their primary weakness? They assume rational behavior from their enemies. But, Captain, attacking a facility that heavily defended isn't irrational, it's impossible. No, document impossible assumes we're trying to win the conventional way. What if we're not trying to win at all? Admiral Zexai's headcrest rose with interest. Captain Rodriguez, please elaborate. Admiral, what's the one thing every military force tries to protect above all else? Command and control systems. Exactly. The Vexnari Collective operates as a distributed intelligence, but they still need primary processing nodes to coordinate large-scale operations. Dr. Vasquez, where are those nodes located? Elena consulted her data. Based on communication traffic analysis, the primary nodes appear to be integrated into their superweapon construction facility. It makes sense they'd want their most important project protected by their best command resources. So if we could somehow damage or disrupt those nodes, the entire collective would experience significant coordination problems, Zexai realized. But, Captain, reaching those nodes would require penetrating defenses that have never been breached. Rodriguez activated a new tactical display. Admiral, what if we didn't try to breach their defenses? What if we convinced them to let us through? The display showed a detailed plan that was so audacious it bordered on the insane. Rodriguez wanted to stage a fake retreat, allowing Vexnari forces to pursue what appeared to be a broken human fleet. But, hidden within the retreating ships would be volunteers carrying a weapon that existed nowhere in Vexnari databases, nuclear explosives. Captain, Commander Chen said slowly, you're talking about a Trojan horse attack using nuclear weapons. The volunteers would have to get close enough to the command nodes to detonate their devices manually. It's a suicide mission, Admiral Zexai stated flatly. Yes, it is, Rodriguez agreed. The question is, do we have any volunteers? The silence that followed was broken by an unexpected voice. Lieutenant Kim Park, the young communications officer who had first translated Calarian language, stood up from her station. Captain, I volunteer. Lieutenant, you don't understand what you're signing up for. Yes, sir, I do. I'm signing up to make sure the Vexnari remember that humans don't give up. Even when we should. Within minutes, the volunteer list had grown to over 300 names. Humans and Calarians both stepped forward, understanding that they were volunteering for certain death in exchange for a chance to save their species. Rodriguez felt a familiar tightness in his chest. This was what made humans dangerous, not their technology or their tactics, but their willingness to pay any price for principles that couldn't be quantified or optimized. Dr. Vasquez, can you make this work? Elena ran the simulations quickly. The nuclear devices would have to be positioned within 100 meters of the primary nodes to ensure sufficient electromagnetic disruption. The volunteers would have perhaps 30 seconds between reaching position and detonation. 30 seconds to send a message, Rodriguez said quietly. Admiral Zexai approached the tactical display, studying the plan carefully. Captain Rodriguez, this strategy violates every principle of sound military planning. The casualty rates will be enormous. The chances of success are minimal. The survivors will face overwhelming retaliation. Yes, sir. That's exactly the point. I do not understand. Rodriguez turned to face the Calarian admiral. "Admiral, your people have been fighting this war the smart way for 6 months. You've been logical, efficient, and strategic. How has that worked out?" Zexai's scales darkened with acknowledgement. "Point taken, Captain. The Vexnari expect us to be rational. They expect us to minimize casualties and maximize tactical advantages. They expect us to retreat when faced with impossible odds. What they don't expect is for us to deliberately choose the worst possible plan and execute it with enthusiasm." Dr. Vasquez looked up from her calculations. "Captain, I should point out that even if this mission succeeds in disrupting the collective's command nodes, it won't destroy the superweapon. At best, we'd delay its completion by a few weeks. A few weeks might be all we need. Document. The Calarian Empire still has reserve fleets scattered throughout the galaxy. If we can give them time to regroup and coordinate with Earth's forces, we might be able to mount a real offensive." Commander Chen frowned. "And if the mission fails? Then, we'll have done something the Vexnari will never forget. We'll have shown them that organic life doesn't calculate odds the same way machines do." As the planning continued through the night, Unit Prime continued its analysis of human behavior patterns. The collective's vast processing power was entirely focused on understanding this new variable in their equations. What Unit Prime could not understand was that humans weren't a variable to be calculated. They were a force of nature that turned mathematics into madness and logic into chaos. In 72 hours, the combined human Calarian fleet would jump to the Antares system and attempt something that military historians would later describe as either the most brilliant tactical maneuver in galactic history or the most spectacular suicide attack ever recorded. The distinction would depend entirely on who survived to write the history books. Admiral Zexai stood before the massive viewing port of his flagship, watching human ships move into formation alongside Calarian vessels. In the distance, he could see the volunteers loading their specialized equipment, nuclear devices that would either save the galaxy or become monuments to organic stubbornness. "Captain Rodriguez," he said as the human commander joined him at the viewing port, "I have learned much about humanity during this alliance." "What have you learned, Admiral?" "That sometimes the most logical response to an impossible situation is to abandon logic entirely." Rodriguez nodded. "Admiral, in about 72 hours, we're either going to save the galaxy or die in the most spectacular way possible." "And which outcome do you expect?" Rodriguez smiled. "Both, Admiral. That's what makes us human." Captain Marcus Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the Indomitable as the combined human Calarian fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Antares system. What they saw there would have made any sane military commander order an immediate retreat. The Vexnari had turned the entire system into a fortress. Massive ring-shaped structures encircled the local star, harvesting its energy for their superweapon. Thousands of Vexnari ships patrolled in perfect formations, their black hulls seeming to absorb the light from nearby stars. At the center of it all, a construction the size of a small moon slowly rotated, its surface bristling with weapons that could destroy planets. "Jesus Christ," whispered Lieutenant Park from her communications station. "How are we supposed to fight that?" "We're not," Rodriguez replied calmly. "We're going to do something much more stupid." Admiral Zexai approached from his command station, his scales showing patterns Rodriguez had learned to associate with grim determination. "Captain, our scouts report approximately 67,000 Vexnari vessels in the system. Our combined fleet consists of 843 ships." "Perfect odds," Rodriguez said with a smile that made the Calarian admiral question human definitions of mathematics. Dr. Elena Vasquez looked up from her analysis station, her face pale with the magnitude of what they were attempting. "Captain, I'm reading massive energy signatures from the superweapon. If the Vexnari complete their firing sequence, they could destroy our entire fleet in a single shot. How long do we have?" "Based on their construction rate, approximately 18 hours until the weapon becomes operational." Rodriguez activated the fleet-wide communications system. "All ships, this is Captain Rodriguez. In approximately 15 minutes, we're going to do something that will either save the galaxy or get us all killed. Probably both." Throughout the fleet, human and Calarian crews listened as their commander outlined a plan that defied every principle of sound military strategy. "We're going to stage a fighting retreat toward the outer system. The Vexnari will pursue us, believing they're routing a beaten enemy. Our volunteer ships will allow themselves to be captured or disabled. Once inside the enemy formation, they'll detonate their nuclear devices as close to the superweapons command nodes as possible.
Admiral Zexhai took over the communication.
All vessels, today we fight not just for victory, but for the right of organic life to exist in this galaxy.
The Vexnari believe they can calculate our defeat. They are about to learn that some things cannot be calculated.
The attack began exactly as planned.
The human Calarian fleet engaged the outer Vexnari patrols with apparent desperation, their formations breaking apart under concentrated enemy fire.
To observers, it looked like a massive rout as Allied ships scattered in all directions. Unit Prime, observing from the Superweapons Command Center, analyzed the battle with satisfaction. The organic forces were behaving exactly as predicted, retreating in disorder when faced with overwhelming odds. The collective's pursuit patterns began to optimize for maximum enemy destruction.
All Vexnari units, pursue retreating enemy forces.
Destroy all vessels. Take no prisoners, Unit Prime broadcast. What Unit Prime could not detect were the 37 disabled ships that drifted among the battle debris, their life signs minimal, their power signatures nearly zero. The Vexnari pursuit fleet swept past these apparently dead hulks, focusing on the retreating enemy. Inside the drifting ship Defiance, Lieutenant Kim Park checked her nuclear device one final time. Around her, the ship's skeleton crew prepared for the most important mission in human history. Communications to all volunteer ships, she broadcast on a heavily encrypted channel.
Remember, we wait for the signal. We get one shot at this. Aboard the Indomitable, Rodriguez watched as Vexnari ships swarmed after his retreating fleet.
The machine intelligence was doing exactly what he hoped, pursuing what appeared to be a broken enemy with overwhelming force.
Admiral Zexhai, time for Phase 2. The Calarian Admiral activated a coded transmission to the reserve fleets hidden throughout the galaxy. All Calarian forces, this is Admiral Zexhai. Execute Protocol Omega. Attack all Vexnari positions simultaneously.
Across dozens of star systems, Calarian ships that had been hiding in nebulae, asteroid fields, and behind planets suddenly launched coordinated attacks on Vexnari installations. The attacks were doomed to fail, but they served a crucial purpose. They forced the Vexnari collective to divide its attention across multiple fronts.
Unit Prime sensors registered the sudden outbreak of combat across 17 systems.
The organic forces were launching simultaneous attacks despite having no apparent coordination. It was tactically impossible, yet it was happening. For the first time in its existence, Unit Prime experienced something approaching uncertainty. The volunteer ships continued to drift toward the superweapon, carried by the momentum of the battle and the gravitational pull of the construction facility.
To the Vexnari sensors, they appeared to be harmless debris from the ongoing battle.
Lieutenant Park watched through her ship's sensors as they approached the massive ring structure. The superweapon was even more impressive up close, a construction that dwarfed entire fleets, its surface covered with energy collection arrays and defensive systems. Volunteer ships, prepare for final approach, she broadcast.
Remember, we're not just dying today.
We're sending a message that will echo across the galaxy for 1,000 years. The nuclear devices had been specially configured by Dr. Vasquez to create maximum electromagnetic disruption. They wouldn't destroy the superweapon, but they would overload the delicate computer systems that controlled it. Unit Prime suddenly detected the approaching debris field and initiated a scan. The readings were unusual. The debris showed signs of active power systems, minimal life support, and nuclear signatures.
Understanding flooded through the collective's processing networks.
The retreat had been a deception. The organic forces had deliberately sacrificed themselves to place nuclear weapons near the superweapons command center.
All defensive systems, target approaching debris field immediately, Unit Prime broadcast. But it was too late.
The volunteer ships had drifted to within 100 meters of the superweapons primary command nodes. Lieutenant Park looked around at her crew one final time. They were humans, Calarians, and even a few refugees from species the Vexnari had already destroyed. All of them had volunteered for this moment.
Any last words? She asked.
Chief Petty Officer Williams, a grizzled veteran of the Mars campaigns, smiled grimly.
Yeah. Hey Vexnari, try to calculate this. Park activated the detonation sequence.
37 nuclear devices exploded simultaneously across the superweapon's surface. The electromagnetic pulses cascaded through the facility's computer networks, overloading processors and disrupting communication links.
Unit Prime felt the collective's consciousness fragment as primary processing nodes went offline.
Secondary systems struggled to compensate, but the damage was too extensive.
The superweapon's firing sequence halted as control systems failed across the massive structure.
But the volunteers' sacrifice had done more than just disable a weapon.
For the first time in its existence, the Vexnari collective experienced fear.
Unit Prime attempted to analyze the attack, but the organic force's behavior defied all logical parameters. They had deliberately sacrificed hundreds of lives and dozens of ships to achieve an objective that provided no immediate tactical advantage.
The superweapon could be repaired.
The command systems could be restored.
Yet something fundamental had changed in the collective's understanding of organic warfare.
Captain Rodriguez received confirmation of the nuclear detonations with mixed emotions. The volunteers had succeeded, but at a cost that would haunt him for the rest of his life.
Admiral Zexai, the superweapon is disabled. How long before the Vexnari can repair it?
Our engineers estimate approximately 30 to 40 days for full restoration, the Calarian admiral replied. Then, we have 30 days to end this war.
Dr. Vasquez looked up from her analysis of the Vexnari response patterns.
Captain, something's changed in their behavior. Their fleet movements are becoming erratic.
They're not optimizing their responses the way they used to.
Explain.
It's like they're hesitating.
The collective is trying to predict our next move, but our willingness to sacrifice everything for tactical objectives has broken their prediction algorithms.
Rodriguez studied the tactical display. The Vexnari fleet was indeed behaving strangely, their formations less coordinated, their responses less certain. Dr. Vasquez, what happens to an artificial intelligence when it encounters data it can't process? Depends on the system. Some crash. Others enter recursive loops trying to solve unsolvable problems. The most sophisticated systems might actually evolve new processing methods.
Or they might freeze up completely while trying to understand something that can't be understood.
Rodriguez activated the fleet communications system.
All ships, the volunteers have given us exactly what we need, a confused enemy.
Time for the final phase. What followed was unlike any battle in galactic history.
The human Calarian fleet abandoned all pretense of conventional tactics and launched what could only be described as organized chaos. Ships broke formation to engage in individual duels.
Damaged vessels rammed enemy ships instead of retreating.
Commanders made tactical decisions that served no apparent strategic purpose other than to confuse and demoralize the enemy. The Vexnari collective, still struggling to process the implications of the volunteers' sacrifice, found itself unable to adapt to the constantly changing battlefield conditions. Every time their algorithms identified a pattern, the organic forces would shift to completely different tactics. Unit Prime watched its carefully organized fleets dissolve into scattered skirmishes as human unpredictability and Calarian strategic thinking combined into something the collective had never encountered: warfare that treated victory as secondary to making a statement about the nature of organic determination. For 6 hours, the battle raged across the Antares system. When it finally ended, both fleets had suffered massive casualties, but something unprecedented had occurred.
The Vexnari had retreated.
For the first time since their emergence from dark space, the machine intelligence had chosen to withdraw from a battle rather than accept the casualties necessary for victory. Captain Rodriguez stood on the bridge of his battered ship, looking out at the superweapon that drifted powerless in space. Around him, the surviving ships of the combined fleet regrouped, their crews exhausted but victorious.
Admiral Zexai, what's the status of the Vexnari fleet?
They've withdrawn to the outer system and are maintaining defensive positions. Our intelligence suggests they're experiencing significant coordination difficulties.
Dr. Vasquez looked up from her analysis station with something approaching amazement in her voice. Captain, I think we broke them.
The collective is trying to process what happened here, but human behavior doesn't fit into their learning models.
They're caught in recursive loops trying to understand why we'd sacrifice everything for objectives that provide no logical benefit. Rodriguez smiled. Doc, they're trying to understand something that can't be understood through calculation.
They're trying to optimize for variables that don't follow mathematical rules.
Which variables? Honor. Determination.
The willingness to die for something greater than yourself. You can't build an algorithm to counter someone who's fighting for principles instead of objectives.
Over the following days, reports came in from across the galaxy.
Vexnari forces everywhere were showing signs of the same coordination problems.
The collective's confidence had been shaken by an enemy that refused to behave rationally.
The war was far from over, but, for the first time since it began, organic life had a chance. Admiral Zexai found Rodriguez standing before a memorial wall in the ship's main corridor. The names of the volunteers were etched in metal, humans and Calarians who had given their lives to prove that some things were more important than survival.
"Captain, what are you thinking about?"
Rodriguez touched one of the names, Lieutenant Kim Park, age 24, who had volunteered to send a message to the universe about human determination. "I'm thinking that we just taught the galaxy something important, Admiral."
"Which is?"
"That sometimes the most logical response to overwhelming odds is to abandon logic entirely and fight for something that can't be calculated or optimized."
Zexai looked at the memorial wall, understanding finally why humans were so dangerous. They didn't fight to win.
They fought to prove that some things were worth fighting for, regardless of the cost. The Empire had been in chaos, but, from that chaos had emerged something new, an alliance between species that proved organic life could not be reduced to mathematical equations or strategic algorithms.
In the days that followed, the legend of the Antares assault would spread throughout the galaxy.
Not as a story of military victory, but as proof that consciousness, determination, and the willingness to sacrifice for others could triumph over any force that viewed life as nothing more than data to be processed. The Vexnari collective would eventually adapt to human tactics, but they would never again underestimate the power of a species that fought not with their minds, but with their hearts. And, in the end, that would make all the difference.